Good morning. I'm Shauna Powers, and this is Saskatchewan Weekend. Up next, an announcement to celebrate.
And the winner is Cluster Stars, Sandra Sutter.
If faith can move mountains, then why can't I believe that my people will protect me, not bring me to my knees? Oh, watch over me, watch over me.
If someone had told a young Sandra Sutter she would win Best Americana Award at the Native American Music Awards, I'm guessing her reaction would have been puzzlement. You see, Sandra was adopted into a white family, and growing up, she didn't even know she was Indigenous. But since connecting with her Cree Métis heritage as an adult, she's worked hard to be a bridge between those two cultures. Sandra grew up in Saskatchewan, but calls Calgary home these days. And I've reached her over the phone this morning. Hi, Sandra.
Hi, Shauna.
Well, I wanted to start by saying congratulations. Can you describe how you felt when you heard them announce your name last weekend?
Well, thank you for the congratulations, and I can tell you that I was thinking that they must have made a mistake. Yeah, and then everybody at my table went, "Hey, that's you!" So it was fantastic.
And you got up and realized, yes, in fact, you legitimately had won that award. Can you talk about what it means for you to be embraced by the larger Indigenous music community in this way?
It's amazing to have this kind of recognition for the work that I do and all of the years and years and years of seeking a way to talk about things that are difficult to talk about. I don't know, I think a lot of us suffer from now I think it's coined as the imposter syndrome, where we think we really aren't, we don't have a right somehow to be ourselves. And so being recognized like this as an Indigenous woman and an Indigenous artist with this amazing respected award puts me in a category where I'm going to be able to reach a whole bunch more folks, and that is just thrilling.
In my introduction, I did mention that you actually didn't realize you were Indigenous when you were growing up. Can you explain how that happened?
I was born in the 60s, and, you know, my own parents, who are wonderful, loving people, they have explained to me that had it been identified on my birth certificate that I was an Indigenous woman, they would not have adopted me, because at the time, Indigenous people weren't described for all the wonderful qualities that we are. And I think you probably are well aware of some of those circumstances.
Sure.
Yeah, my birth mother didn't identify me as Indigenous on my birth certificate, likely, although I never had the opportunity to ask her, because she passed away a number of years ago, and I never got to that point with her. I was always very sensitive about the circumstances around why she had to give me into care.
Yeah.
I never got to ask her, but she didn't identify it on my birth certificate, and I suspect that was so that I would be adopted.
When did you first get the sense that you actually might have connections to the Indigenous community?
From a young child, I always had some sort of identification with the land and with Indigenous culture and people. And I used to ask my mom, "Are you sure I'm not Native?" And then she would show me my birth certificate that clearly said Scottish and German. She thought that that would reassure me, but it never did. I knew that I was one of the people. So when I found my birth father's family, you know, I felt that sense of belonging that I hadn't felt before. My family that I grew up in is wonderful. We have very close relationships. Most of my cousins are actually more like siblings. But my brothers are both blonde-haired, blue-eyed boys. I look nothing like them. So people used to tell my dad and I, he's a dark-haired People used to tell us all the time how much we looked like each other, and we would giggle. We would giggle.
Now, you say that your mom sort of would always show you your birth certificate when you were starting to question things yourself. But can you describe, was there a particular moment in time when this hunch that you had that you were Indigenous was actually first validated by someone else?
Yeah, I guess when I met my birth father's family, they had brought the family into Saskatoon to meet me. And when some of these people walked into the room to meet me, who are now my extended family members, my birth family, I already knew some of them. I knew them from when I was a teenager in Saskatoon, but didn't know we were related. That was really interesting. My birth father, he died tragically in a car accident when he was 31 years old, and he never knew about me. So this family who'd lost this man who was such a strong influence in their lives met this woman who was a spitting image of him.
Wow.
And I am. We've put pictures of he and I side by side, and you can't, my own father who raised me can't tell the difference who's who in the pictures. I think for them it was freaky and unbalancing. And since then, the family has really, I'm so lucky, they've embraced me. They've become part of the larger extended family, and I know that doesn't happen always, but our families are all interconnected now, and it's a beautiful thing.
I wonder how connecting with your extended birth family kind of changed the nature of your relationship with the family you grew up with. It sounds like you said, it's very interconnected, but were there things that shifted inside the relationship that you'd grown up with your whole life?
Yes, I think my mom and I started to understand one another better, and I'm not exactly sure why or how that is, but I became more relaxed as a human because I found that identity that was so long denied to me. My dad struggled with my Indigenous identity for many years, and now he's, I would say, an advocate for Indigenous people, and he would tell you that he wished he had known that I was First Nations, Cree, Métis, Inuit, one of the Indigenous peoples growing up, because it would have helped them to understand me better.
We see, sadly, too many examples of Indigenous children that have been adopted into white families, that even if they're aware of their Indigenous identity, there's so much of a struggle with identity, and that shapes some very tragic outcomes in some lives. Why do you think you were able to navigate your way through this situation that so many struggle with?
I think part of it is that, I grew up in a small town in Saskatchewan, and what a great way to grow up. I grew up in a time where you could ride your bike all day, and my brother Trevor gave me a transistor radio at some age, and I used to hang that off my handlebars and go ride my bike all day, be outside, be in nature. And I used to be able to run around in my bare feet with my friends, and I don't think kids get to grow up like that, and I don't think everyone got to grow up like that, but I always knew that I had a safe place to come home to, all the food and nourishment and love that I could stand. We have, great extended family and friendships and all of that. So even though I didn't feel like I belonged to the family that I was raised in many ways, I knew that I was safe there, and I knew that I was loved there. I think probably I knew at a core level that it wouldn't have mattered if I was purple. I would still be loved there. It's not to say that growing up was perfect. I don't think any human life growing up is perfect.
No.
I had lots of challenges, and, one of the things that happened early in my life was my parents always said, "Oh, you're adopted, that means you're special." And of course, as a young kid, you don't really know what that means. Yeah. But I took it to mean that I was a superhero of some kind. So imagine how devastated I was when I was walking up these monkey bars when we lived in Regina, 7 years old. Yeah. walking up them with no hands on these rounded old metal monkey bars, speaking what I imagined was Russian to my little friend, saying, "Hey, I'm adopted. Listen to me speak Russian and watch me walk on these monkey bars with no hands." And then I wiped out and knocked out 3 of my teeth and had to be carried home.
Oh, no.
So bleeding, somebody carries me home, hands me to my mother, these grade 6 kids, and says, and I say, "I thought you said I was adopted." Oh, my gosh. And now I have to get braces. I'm 52.
Oh, you're kidding. And it's a result of that fall, do you think?
Well, my mom says these 2 big teeth grew into that gap that I had created, and they had to pull some teeth because I had these rabbit teeth and there was no room for them.
Oh, dear. Now, I know that it's been very important for you in your personal life, but also in your creative life and with the album Cluster Stars to kind of celebrate the bonds between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Can you describe why that's so important to you?
I've had so many mentors in my life who remind me that it's our responsibility to do the good and to build the bridges that we can in our lives. That for me, growing up in a non-Indigenous family and being so entrenched in the idea of what my First Nations Métis culture can do for me, I want to be able to share the beauty of that culture, the extreme beauty and wisdom of that culture with people who haven't been exposed to it yet, and create a place where people can safely navigate in today's world, understanding that we are one. We are all one family. Yeah. And it's very important to me.
This morning we're going to hear your song Goodbye from the album Cluster Stars. Can you tell us the inspiration behind this song?
You know, that song is something that I wrote years ago that I had difficulty singing out loud without crying every time that I sang it, because it's about losing the ability to stay connected to a family member. And for me personally, you know, as an adopted person, I know lots of people who've been put in situations where their children have been removed from them. And in Indigenous communities, children are seen as a gift. We evolved in a time when, for many people, women were shamed if they were pregnant before they were married. In Indigenous cultures, that's not the case.
Yeah.
Then imagine what it's like to either endure forced sterilization or to have your child taken away from you because you're from a certain family group and another family group is seen as having more of an ability to raise that child, versus being provided with the supports that are needed to not only raise that child in a good way, but to live in a good way, supported by all of the things that contribute to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For me, that song is heartbreaking, but it's also inspiring because you never lose a connection to someone you are related to by blood. For me, I was really lucky. I got to find my family. My family is reconnected in many, many ways. I would love for everybody to have that experience. I know that that's, you know, in a utopian world that might exist, but it doesn't exist in ours. But I want to help people to feel hope somehow, even within that bittersweet, rich sadness that, for me, that song evokes.
I just want to say again, congratulations on your big award from last weekend at the Native American Music Awards. I know that you are nominated for Indigenous Songwriter of the Year at the Canadian Folk Music Awards, so still more celebrations to come for you this fall. It's been just lovely to meet you over the phone.
Thank you so much for your time, Shauna, and I can't wait to hear Saskatchewan Weekend again.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Sandra Sutter grew up in Saskatchewan and calls Calgary home these days. Last weekend, as I mentioned, she won the Best Americana Award at the Native American Music Awards in New York State and has been nominated for Indigenous Songwriter of the Year at the Canadian Folk Music Awards. Those are handed out in Calgary on November 30th and December the 1st. From her album Cluster Stars, here she is performing Goodbye.
To go. Sometimes when loved ones say goodbye, it's easier than hello. Goodbye, it won't be easy without you. Kind words just to ease me. Oh, but what else can I do? It's just another round of overdues. Another day's gone by. I'm busy catching up. These last years while I've tried to run faster than remembering you and the pain I'd like to hide. I wonder what your family's like. Are they better than I'd be? Did our goodbye give you a life that was sweeter than one with me? It's just another round of overdues. Another year's gone by. Catching up on nothing, getting better at goodbye. Goodbye is like a victory, one that I can never own, and the prize is being alone. It's just another round of overdues. Another year's gone by. I'll be catching up on nothing, getting better at goodbye. Till the hello lost in my IOUs, till the day when you come home. I might never say goodbye again to the child I've never known. Till the hello lost in my IOUs, till the day when you come home. Don't make me ever say goodbye again to the child I wish I'd known.
From her album Cluster Stars, that's Sandra Sutter with a song called Goodbye. Last weekend, she won the Americana Music Award at the Native American Music Awards, and she's up for a Canadian Folk Music Award at the end of November. You've been listening to Saskatchewan Weekend on CBC Radio 1. We're heard at 94.1 FM in Saskatoon, 102.5 FM in Regina, and 540 AM all around the province.